This is Siddharth Alwalia. Welcome to the 100x Entrepreneur Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Prime Venture Partners, an early stage VC fund led by Amit Somani, Shripati Acharya, and Sanjay Swami. Prime is often the first institutional investor in category creating tech startups in fintech, SaaS, healthcare, and education, such as MyGate, Quizzes, MFine. To know more about Prime, visit primevp.in. Today I have with me Shruti Gandhi, founder of Array Ventures. Array Ventures is a B2B focused fund solving big problems by leveraging deep cutting edge technology. Shruti has also an MBA from the University of Chicago, where she polished her finance skill before making the switch from engineer slash founder to the VC world. Till now, Array Ventures has five exits in the last 3 years to companies such as Apple, GoDaddy, McGraw Hill, Samsung, and Brocade. Welcome, Shruti, to the 100x Entrepreneur Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Shruti, we'd love to know about your journey from Mumbai to US. How did that happen? And the subsequent key milestones along the journey.
Yeah, it's not a typical journey. The journey was I came here in '99, right before college, and then you know there's obviously a lot in that happens in between. But college, I went to undergrad at a school in New York, upstate New York, called Marist College. I studied computer science, graduated in 2.5 years, and continued. I work at IBM, which is in the same town. So I used to work at IBM along with going to college, and then I went to grad school, computer science master's at Columbia University. Also continued to work at IBM around the same time, and then left to start a company. Went to business school at U Chicago. Continued to work at different places around that time, and then after Booth, I joined Samsung and their investment arm, which is now called Samsung Next. I was one of the early people that helped start that. After Samsung, went to True Ventures, and about 4.5, 5 years ago, started my fund Array Ventures, um, focus on enterprise, as you know, and we write first check into the founders as as they're getting formed.
Shruti would love to know about Array Ventures. Why did you choose to focus only on the enterprise segment? What's your check size and what's the fund size like?
Yeah, good question. We invest $500,000 to $1 million, depending on the round size of 500,000 to 2 million. Um, and we like to partner with founders that are technical, that find a need in the category that is so dire that they just want to give up a very high paying corporate job to solve that problem. And they have some friends at that time who kind of validate them by saying, if you build this product, I'll buy it. That's when we come in and say, let's get you there. And we also have to think about their go to market of how to get from 0 to 1 million ARR to 10 million ARR to 100 million ARR, and what it takes to get there. So the reason I started enterprise was, like, to me, I've been in enterprise world throughout. um, at our stage, I find enterprise to be more valuable and a more of a playbook that I can help with. I find consumer to be obviously great companies. Consumer companies have come through, but for me, the value that I can provide on the consumer side is very minimal. So we focus on enterprise for that reason and help companies think about that growth from the enterprise perspective.
And uh, any certain percentage that you want to have in the company or ownership at the first round itself?
Yeah, we try to optimize for anywhere from 8 to 15%, depending on the round.
You have also invested in some of the Indian companies like Matt Street. Then, so is the fund global in nature? Or, what's the focus of the fund in terms of geographies?
The fund is global, meaning the company could be anywhere as long as it's Delaware Corp, and um, as long as they're focused on global markets, not just a particular geographic market. So, except it's okay if it's US to start with. It's big enough for us to, and that's where I'm based. But we have invested a lot in companies in India and Israel. But again, they're focused on the global markets, solving global problems like security or cloud or infrastructure or things like that. So that's what we're open to investing in.
And what are the other of companies which started in India that you have invested in?
CasaOne is another one. It's also with Excel. I know we were talking about them right before the podcast. Um, I think those are the two that come to mind. Yeah.
And the typical, enterprise companies have been slow to reach IPO, but in the recent turn of events, around six B2B companies, Palantir and the likes of others, have gone IPO. So, do you see this market certainly booming up for the appetite of retail investors?
Yes, funny enough, when I was in India in 2015 or 16, talking about my fund and how I was going to start an enterprise fund, most investors there that you know and probably work with kind of shut me down by saying we only focused on consumer and that's our future here. Flipkart and stuff was getting big, so
Yes.
they were saying that we have a big, we have a big user base in the country for consumer, on the consumer side, and that's what we're going to use and invest in. And my argument to them was like, as these companies become big, they're going to have infrastructure problems, store, all these other problems on the back end. What are you going to do? um so that so that's the funny anecdote.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the thing with enterprise though is the retail investor may want to do it, but one, they can't get into those deals oftentimes because they don't understand at the stage what the companies do. So funny story is like, to this day, like unless there was like a big Salesforce tower, erected in San Francisco, a lot of people didn't know what Salesforce even was. And that's one of the most popular, oldest, really, good enterprise company.
Yeah.
So, companies that in the enterprise world go public, make $16 billion in returns and all those things. And like, they have great, like App Dynamics was sold for 4, MuleSoft was taken private for 16, right? Like Okta was public recently and doing pretty well, Twilio. But most people don't understand or know these companies. So the funny thing is, when I talk about my fund, everyone's eyes glazes over because you pitch this fund and then you talk about, look at these exits, and they are like, well, yeah, but it's not Snap and Facebook, right? Like, because they don't understand these brands. And it's like trying to prove to them, like, look, this is a market that's making a ton of money. So will the retail investors come into this category? Maybe, but it's going to be through fun. And I think the changes in SEC regulation might just actually allow these people to enter these kinds of funds. So I think that's a long-winded way of saying yes and no. I don't know. Again, it's not attractive to talk at a cocktail party as to like how I invested in like this cool new security company,
As compared to Uber, as somebody talks to, hi,
Exactly.
I'm a first investor in Uber, and somebody would say, I am a first investor in a $50 billion enterprise company.
You get my point because you're an enterprise investor, right? So yeah.
Yes, yes. And uh, s- tell us about some of your companies, which are doing really well, and your thesis behind investing in them.
Our thesis generally is, let's take advantage of data and see how we can disrupt any industry with that data. So it's pretty broad, and that's on the application side. But there's also more on the back end side need that for any of these companies on the front end. So we go across the stack. um, and I think like one of our recent investments, Blumira, is a good example of um, you know like right now we're working remotely. There's a lot of security issues and threat. So that's not the exciting part actually. They do automated threat detection and response, which is awesome. But a lot of companies do that. What I do love about Blumira is they actually highlight the false positives in a very minimal way. So you don't get 100 alerts a day of attacks, but you get one or two, and it's meaningful. And then they have a whole workflow around what they do with that to tackle for the teams to really address those. So that's what customers love about their product. And that's an example of a company that we invested recently that is you know is funding basically a lot of companies. You would keeping a lot of companies today safe, right? Like based on their product that's working on the back end.
And is the current environment in US where six companies have gone IPO, just filed on the same day for S1. Do you think it's a bubble, or there is real value which uh, the investors are seeing? That's why they are buying into these companies to take them public.
Well, I mean, I'm too small of a player to talk to comment on public markets, so I would refer to this as a question I don't think I'm educated enough to answer. But what I can say is we've believed that enterprise needs, what people are calling a digital transformation right now, and that's a key driver as to why I believe in enterprise companies, and I'm going to continue to invest in enterprise for the foreseeable future. So bubble or not, enterprises are stale. They have old technology. They're not taking advantage of data, AI, machine learning to the point that they should. In every vertical, marketing, sales, HR, finance, everything. So we make sure that we are funding those technologies that enterprises can adopt today and 5 years from now and 10 years from now.
And let's talk some, about your exits: Passage AI, Hivy, Simility. What were these exits like for you?
Yeah, actually, this is great for us because we're so mindful of when we enter into the companies. The good example for Simility was it got acquired, I believe, 3 years after we invested, um, for 120 million. So it was almost 10x or more, right? Like so from the initial check. And so that's a good
Yes.
example of, and it was all cash. So PayPal acquired that company for in cash. And so for us, it's a great way because to invest in something and to believe in the founder because the company was growing, but at the same time, the founders decided that was the path they wanted to take, and we are aligned with our founders on what they think. We think, on what they think is best. We want to support them. So in that case, we were happy taking that kind of a return. Obviously, if they kept going, we would have been happy, with that as well. So same with the Passage. We actually had we're not talking about the number, but we had a good return as well on our end. And so with amongst these companies, and then Hivy was actually acquired twice. It was acquired once by Managed by Q, and then second Managed by Q was then acquired by WeWork. So we ended up getting a bunch of money back through those acquisitions and shares. So we've been able to actually return a good portion of our first fund through these exits. So as a young fund, those kinds of numbers really matter. And so for us, while we want founders to go after the $1 billion plus idea, um, we also don't mind if founders decide to give us a good return early on as well.
And uh, what would be your ideal exit? Would you would go for a acquisition in a 5 or 6 years span, or you would wait for 10 years for an IPO?
I think ideally it's an IPO. But what I'm saying is, if the founders decide to, you know, take the other acquisition route, we want to support them. We don't want to fund those founders I mean, I don't think anyone starting out dreams of just getting acquired. There are a few people who start companies in that way, but, the, you know, but I think we want to go for founders that want to dream big. If in the path something else ends up happening, we're okay with that outcome.
And do you invest with the philosophy that you focus on goals, or the philosophy the score takes care of itself? So means you just focus on the input and don't and the process, or
Um,
uh,
no, goals are very important. We care about how fast you want to get to 100 million in revenue. So, I don't think my philosophy is, if don't, you know, dream big, you're not going to get there. And the sad part of a startup journey is that the founders always are passionate about something, but they just don't know how to grow. So that's where we come in. We help think about that growth. Our focus on the fund, even though we're technical, is growth and go to market. And I think, I was just talking about this with another co-investor yesterday, that we'd invested in this company about 4 years ago. one company we were talking about. And while the founders are resilient and it's great, 4 years ago when we did invest in them and we would have asked them, what do you think they're going to be at 4 years from now? I'm sure they said IPO, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but it's a very, startup journey is very long and it's very brutal. And so I'm sure 4 years later, they were not thinking we're going to be in this, but unfortunately, that's the reality for most companies. 4, 5, 6 years in, they're still just trying to figure it out and they haven't even gotten out of their own J curve, if you will. So that's where we are. But we do try to focus on companies that do dream big, at least.
And I believe you have a portfolio of close to 50 companies right now.
Yeah, close. It's like 40. Yeah, it's like about 44, 45 or something like that. Yeah. But we invest maybe like one company a month. So yeah.
So what's your observation on, on the average time taken in case of your companies, from, let's say, from 0 to $1 million in ARR, and then from $1 to $10 million in ARR?
That's a good question. I think ideally average is, um if the companies are, so here's the thing, there's two milestones. Because of the kinds of things we invest in, there is a tech build up, and that takes a year plus oftentimes. But the minute they actually have a meaningful revenue, I a million usually takes another 12 months from there. So I would say in an ideal world it's 1 year, but in a realistic world it's more 2 years, where the company takes, you know a, an average. I'm talking an average, right? Like, not talking about like the best deals, but they take about 2 years to get to a million. And then I think after that they have to get to a point of like the next year is usually 3 million. It's hard to, they all ideally that's like a good growth company where it gets from 1 to 3 to 10 to 30, right? Like that's like the journey you're ideally optimizing for. But very few companies get to that point. They get from 1 to, they usually get to 2.5, unfortunately. And then from 2.5 they're trying to get to maybe like 5 or they get to 5 or 6, but not like 10. um it takes, there are a lot of growing pains for founders.
And why do you think there's so much struggle, uh, between 1 to 10 for enterprise companies? Is that the founder are not able to calculate churn over a period of time, or is it because
Churn is
the
not the only thing. Churn is good for consumer company to track, and that's i- in enterprise. There's just so much to set up. Like, it's founder led sale initially. Then you have to find VP sales. Then you have to find VP marketing. You have to figure out what your go to market strategy is. Is it content based? Is it tops down? Is it bottom up? Is it both? Then you have to figure out your sales motion. What kind of team are you building? um, and then it's very hard to find those right salespeople. They cost a lot, but then if they're not delivering, you lose that momentum, and you have to fire them. It takes like 2 3 quarters to figure that out. So it's actually, and by that time it's like a year, right? Like, so it's actually a lot around that. It's not just like put ads out there, and like that's not the playbook really. um Consumer companies obviously have a different set of problems, but enterprise company, this is what happens. And then most enterprise technical founders don't know marketing. They don't actually know how marketing truly works, so that's why they're still hidden in some way. And then in parallel to all this, they have to convince enterprise investors that they should be funded. Um, so that's what happens, and so it takes a while till everyone gets in their groove.
and can you share, not naming the names, but the companies in your portfolio which have crossed the $10 million, or which are close to about reaching the $10 million ARR milestone? What was unique about their journey?
you know yeah, what's unique about those companies is they took a while to get to that point, but they figured it out. They have a good sales motion and they have a good marketing motion, and the team works in harmony. I think that's my learning here. That every founder brings in very different skill set and goal of what they want to optimize for. So when when you invest in those kinds of teams that just kind of gel well, that's the magic happens. Basically, they're not trying to fight each other. They're not trying to fight intentions. They're not trying to figure out if so I think that's big. And the biggest another second step is like the founders have good technical skills on board and sales skill within the team. So the ones that have kind of gotten to that point have good sales skills and then contacts with customers, and but also, you know, good technical team that can build whatever the customer is asking for fast.
But what you shared is quite different from what most enterprise founders start with,
Yeah,
because usually there are two tech founders working in an enterprise. They get a problem day in day out on a tech front and working in an enterprise, and they tend to solve for that. And would you agree?
100%. And that's why you asked me that question of why it takes so long. That's exactly why they have to get from that to this next stage, what I talk about. And they have to learn how to grow themselves on sales perspective.
But I also see a very rare combination of a very, let's say, a good enterprise VP sales combining with a good engineering manager in an enterprise, and then combining forces together to start a enterprise focused company. Why is that? Shruti,
That's hard because the salespeople are not true, like they don't think about entrepreneurship from that perspective, and they're getting paid well.
yeah.
So, you know, I do know people like, and oftentimes they don't know the technical people. So, you know, the sale the if people that have sold in the past and like made money, and if they go back with the same founders and build something, that's great team. But but if that salesperson then goes and looks for a technical founder, like magic happens again with by like you don't just sell because you can't, because you're good at selling, because there's the team aligned everything for you as well to make that sale happen, right? Like, and there's different kind of salespeople who take the company to a million. They're loners. Salespeople who can build teams, they're more like builders. So I think there's like a unique set of skill set that kind of that is needed. And initially when you're starting a company, you don't want anyone on your team that can't do anything. So oftentimes you don't just start a company with a salesperson, because you don't just then you don't know how to utilize them unless that salesperson is open to doing other things initially, right? So that's hard. That's the combo of all these things really needs to work. I always say, all in startup there's like one thing that works, everything else doesn't. And that one thing kind of makes the company break out. And you have to figure out that what that one thing, magic X factor, what people call it, could be.
And in your experience, for like, let's take example of your portfolio companies. How long have you seen the company keep up their moats till a large enterprise company comes after their use case which they are solving for?
I don't think it's a large enterprise company that comes in after that. It's usually another startup.
And does that hamper the market immediately, or what do you think? Because founders
No,
then.
and not immediately. I mean, look, it's all about the execution. And if you're starting a company where there's no competition, then frankly, you're one starting maybe something that, and especially if there's no competition for a while. I mean, that's rare. And
Yeah.
and I'm not even sure if there's like real examples of that per se. But if you're starting something and if there is no competition, you don't have any like fire on like that drives you either. You can get complacent. So competition is actually good. It drives people, and that's the piece. Usually there's enough big markets out there that there is room for multiple winners. There's very few kinds of markets where only one player wins it all basically, and it can exist. We don't live in a world where monopoly is the answer. So oftentimes that's okay. If there is a player already, it's okay. There's always opportunity for like a new player with the new tech stack, and tech changes so fast that that's the way that the market, the approach, the user, what the user wants at the time, everything changes. And so I feel that there's always room for multiple players that tackle the market in different ways.
Shruti, and on your profile, you call yourself the chief business development for your portfolio companies. How do you manage to do that? Uh,
Yeah, that's a good
because
question
you are.
for us. That's, as I said, that's the go to market piece, and how we get help the companies think about the 0 to 1 journey. And oftentimes that's where we focus a lot on how do they get from that 0 to 1 million ARR and 10 million ARR and 100 million ARR, and what they need to get there. And so we help them think through all that.
But you are also making one investment per month. So how do you get to focus on, let's say, the the 44, 45, the go to market motion of 44, 45 companies.
We don't do it. It's then they graduate to the next investor. So our success is once they get a good round from the Excel or the Sequoia or other funds out there. So that's so, and on an active basis, there's usually like 7 to 8 companies that we're helping out.
And one of the really good companies in your portfolio is Matt Street Den. How did you discover Ashwani Ashokan before she became popular?
um, that company was recommended to us actually by one of her angel investors, um, and who's also a friend of ours. So that's how we discovered them.
And usually for you, that's the route where how you discover your new portfolio companies,
Yeah,
mostly through referrals.
yeah, basically.
Great. And so for how important is it for a, let's say, a very early stage B2B investor like you to build a very good network of early angels? Because
Very, 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 very important.
B2C companies are easier to discover. You may discover a Uber on the Play Store to book a cab, or you may see your next person in a bar using Uber.
Yeah,
But
and then you also have problems that you kind of face that you think this company could solve. So it's like it becomes a personal thing. You know, enterprises don't work that way unless you have been in an enterprise and you have that
yeah,
experience. You can't just be like, I think I'm looking for a new identity solution. This is, that you don't do that. So, um, yeah, it's usually through the referral network of people we trust and co-invest with.
so you have a network of scouts, or what do you call them? Where
Nothing. We just have friends.
okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Shruti. It was wonderful to have you on the podcast. And any key learnings which you would like to share with the listeners who are entrepreneurs and building for B2B on the first step on 0 to 1 million journey, what things can go wrong and how to avoid them.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think don't forget to, really validate your customers and validate with your customers, I mean, and ask them how much they really want to pay and when. I think most founders get passionate about an idea and forget to really um, do the math of when they'll get customers, when the customers will want to pay, and how much. And they don't, and they're too shy because they're technical founders. Sometimes they're too shy to ask. Like when friends say, "Oh yeah, yeah, it's good," they forget to ask, like, "Is it a $50,000 annual contract or 250K?" Just put a number out there, right? Um, and that's a problem because once they put a number out there, everyone feels that they're tied to it. But then for you, it gives you a good sense of like, okay, if this company can pay me 100,000 and this other company can pay me 100,000, and I can only handle two or three right now, that literally means I can only do 300K in revenue maybe by end of the year, while I thought I was going to be a million, you know, by end of the year. So math kind of becomes more transparent once you're more honest um, about your journey. And so don't forget to ask, really work hard with your customers. And by the way, these are customers in enterprise, they take a long time to close. So maybe out of the 300 you thought that the three friends were going to pay, only one comes through in the time frame you're looking for. So I think that doesn't mean you shouldn't start a company. That just means you kind of go in with a realistic point of view. If you do that math out of like how many companies can I convince to buy my product year four even, um, and if you do that math, most people think year four is when you start preparing for an IPO, but it's actually you're much, much further from it, and you're not even halfway there by that point. So are you ready to go on that journey? That's going to take 10, 15 plus years. And that's the piece people forget to do, that kind of actual self-awareness exercise.
And every year in a startup land seems like 5 or 10 years for the founders. So it's,
It
it's
does
rough.
age you for sure. Yeah, you can't focus on your family. Oftentimes founders say it's a lonely job. You don't, there's so much stress, you don't have time to exercise. So you often, like, people like gain weight, they feel bad, they lose hair. It's not easy. And it doesn't mean after all this you get a great outcome. That's not guaranteed either. So yeah, it's not for the lighthearted, and it's not for the rational people either, who kind of just like the salary and the comfort and all that. So Yeah, entrepreneurship sounds glamorous on the outside, but it's truly not that glamorous. And the success stories you hear are yours in making.
Yes, also it's very a good quote for entrepreneurship called people only focus on survivors. That's called survivorship bias. They don't focus on every person who survives or the thousand which are buried in the graveyard.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much, Shruti. It's been wonderful to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and I loved it.